Groundhog's Day. Apparently, my audio was down. Thank you for the heads up about the audio. Apparently, there was a small section of it, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, where there was no audio. So, let's do this again. Otherwise, the video is going to be kind of weird. Um, Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor. Now, as you know, Gavin Newsom has been recalled, or there's a recall election taking place for Gavin Newsom. California, just like New York, has been hit very hard with COVID. It's somewhat destabilizing. Not to mention there's economic woes, especially the homeless population in California. So, a recall election. Now, the catch becomes, in this recall election, pretty much a motley crew of anybody can get into the race in order to try to win that race. And so Newsom is going to be facing all sorts of people. Caitlyn Jenner is one of those people that he's going to be facing. And Decathlon runner, if this was about running and riding a bicycle and playing tennis, then yes, Caitlyn Jenner would be the person. But this is not about that. This is about intellectual pursuit. And not just the intellectual pursuit. We're living in a country where nearly 600,000 people have died. A large share of those people died in California. You have all sorts of problems that are in California that need to be worked out, where people actually do need governance. I'm unclear on Caitlyn Jenner's qualifications for this. And yet, here she is, powered entirely by her name. That's what it seems to be about. If Caitlyn Jenner was Bob Taub, then nobody would know that she was there because she would not be running for governor, but powered entirely by name. What's interesting here, she goes and sits down with Sean Hannity for a predictable, sad, tone-deaf interview. And the tone deafness hits a Nancy Pelosi level of tone deafness in the way that she's talking about this stuff. California has actual problems that need to be attended to. Is Caitlyn Jenner the one to do it? Or is she pulling an Arnold Schwarzenegger where she's just a name? And the name in and of itself has enough recognition and enough fame to put her in that office. Even when the things that they're talking about are not entirely directly related to policy, or for the most part, don't even make much sense. I'm going to show you this interview with Sean Hannity. It's an hour long. I'm not going to show you the entirety of the hour. I'm going to show you bits and pieces of it. You can watch it for yourself. But I failed to see her qualifications. And from the standpoint of this interview, it didn't tell me or show me anything other than the fact that she's out of touch. And not just out of touch, bad ideas. Bad ideas. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's out of her depth. And yet, America, those things aren't always needed. Donald Trump became our president. Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of California. Ronald Reagan became president. I mean, you don't necessarily see it now just looking back on it, but Ronald Reagan was a movie star. The idea that he was going to be president was utterly insane. And at the time, lefties thought it was the end of the world, just like they thought it was the end of the world with George Bush, who they've now rehabilitated. And just like they thought it was the end of the world with Donald Trump, who, after the next president, Tom Cotton, Donald Trump would be rehabilitated. That's how sad it is. So let's do this. I'm going to show you guys bits and pieces of this interview. Some of the stuff she's saying here is just utter, like, just fucking ludicrous. But I'm going to show you bits and pieces of it. Welcome to a redo Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you allowing me to do it. Yes, there was a portion of the last video that was missing sound, so I want to thank all of you for giving me a heads up about the missing sound part. But let's redo. Listen to what she's saying here. Listen to what she's saying here. We're talking about California. Gavin Newsom's being recalled. There are problems in California dealing with homeless, dealing with the number of deaths, budget, etc., etc. Newsom is taking the blame on some level and is taking the brunt and basically ended up in a recall. Caitlyn Jenner is running for the race. Listen to what, just the idea that she says this, but listen to what she says here. Talking about homeless, she's connecting two things: a hanger and the homeless. Phenomenal.
Packing up his hanger. I said, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I'm from California. My friends are leaving California." Actually, where my hanger, the guy across right over from me, he was packing up his hanger. I said, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I'm moving to Sedona, Arizona. I can't take it here anymore. I can't walk down the streets and see the homeless. I don't want to leave." Okay, either I stay and fight or I get out of here. California.
I hope you hear what she said. Let me play just this one part one more time.
My friends are leaving California. Actually, where my hanger, the guy across right over from me, he was packing up his hanger. I said, "Where are you going?"
My friend was packing up his hanger. I said, "Where you going?" And he says, "I can't deal with the homeless." Now, she's recounting the story to us about a friend of hers that has so much wealth that he basically has a hangar. He basically has a private jet. And he's like, the homeless are so unsightly. They're so unsightly. When I'm stepping over the homeless guy in order to get into my limo, in order to go to my third house, I don't like seeing them. I work too hard to have to see these vagrants walking through, peeing in the sidewalk, peeing in the subway. I don't want to have to see that. And so when I'm getting into my hangar, I'm bothered by that. I'm perturbed by that. Caitlyn is basically relaying a story to us about one of her rich friends that didn't like seeing the homeless. Now, I will wager that pretty much nobody likes to see homeless because nobody wants people to be homeless. At least I don't want people to be homeless. I don't want people being on the street, subjected to the elements. And honestly, if a society cares about the individuals that are in that society, then the question needs to be asked on whether or not they should be homeless at all. Whether all powers of the state and the country should be brought to bear to ensure that people are not living on the street, or for that matter, are living relatively decent lives. When we had this issue of the recidivism rate, and John Kiriakou talks about this, where we had this program where we were giving money to the inmates when they got out of prison, either education and helping with basically their living situation. And they found magically that the recidivism rate went down when you gave people the things that they needed to get from point A to point B. Those people were able to basically cobble their life together and do something, living and sustaining themselves on their own. They had the things that they need in order to get basically a decent life. If you are arguing Gavin Newsom screwed up in all of his failures, okay, fair enough. And in the context of that, you're talking about how horrible the homeless are. Okay, yeah, people again would agree that they don't like people being homeless. But you can't then connect that to a friend with a private jet. In this conversation, connecting these two things is just so weird. That's just an odd thing to say. These homeless people are so unsightly. And when I'm getting on my private jet, I just don't like seeing them. I just don't like seeing these homeless people. All right, fair enough. You don't like seeing the homeless people. Homeless people are unsightly. I would say that the priorities of a particular state, they should tax the rich more. But would you be for them taxing people like you more in order to eliminate the homeless population that's there? That gets to the nub of it, right? Are you willing to do something about the homeless? What you say, you're willing to stay and fight. Okay, how are you willing to stay and fight? Are you going to stay and fight by paying more taxes? Are you going to push for them to increase the taxes so you can, deal with the homeless population? Or are you just a celebrity who's just saying things without any real knowledge of how the stuff actually works? I suspect it's that one. Here's another one where she's talking about, right here. Here's one on wildfires. Well, let's skip the one on wildfires. I want to go down to the one where she is talking about high-speed rail.
It's not.
I got to be honest. I think this is it gets across the level of naivety in regards, or just distance. Like I said, a decathlon of tone deafness and the way that real people pursue their life. In one sense, she's telling us about a guy who owns a hangar and one of her friends, basically, who has, I suppose, private jets. And in another sense, she's talking about a regressive policy that I don't think she quite gets how it adversely affects many people in the population that don't necessarily have the income base that she has. I get that she's looking at the world through this particular lens, but 42% of the population lived off of $18,000 or less. And that was during the time before COVID. What is that number today? I have no idea. But I don't necessarily think that number is going to be better. Listen to what she says here about high-speed rail.
See how the vegetation is very, it's not green. It's just because it just hasn't got much water. We are headed for a drought. That has to be looked at in advance. Here's my crazy thinking. Again, Sean, logical thinking. We are now spending billions of dollars on this high-speed rail, okay? They talk about it all the time between LA and San Francisco. And I'm going, why are we doing that? I can get on a plane at LAX and I'll be in San Francisco in 50 minutes. Why do we need high-speed rail? Why don't we do this? Why don't we invest that money in desalination plants along the coast? Take that water, and anytime it's a bad year, desalinate the water, have some pipes going over the mountains out to the San Joaquin Valley for all our farmers, have it down here. We're in the Camarillo area. You look right over here. I drive through the farmyards every year. Why don't we just start to look at it? Wait a second. Maybe water is a bigger issue than trying to move a few people,
believe it or not,
fast.
33 years ago.
Is it true, though? If your government has certain needs, let's say part of the need is transportation to get people from point A to point B, basically infrastructure. And keep in mind, the infrastructure has several positive benefits. A, it brings down the price, meaning for people who want to take the airplane, like I said, 42% of the population made $18,000 or less. So just because Jenner has the capability of getting on an airplane on a whim, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else does. And more importantly, you're talking about half of the population is basically poor. And so where are these people going to go when they need to take a flight or when they need to go from point A to point B? And does she realize that having high-speed rail lowers the cost of flights and lowers the cost of transportation in those various areas? Not just that. Economic output, economic activity, those things go up when you're adding things like high-speed rail. So the money that you invest from the standpoint of the quote-unquote billions comes back to you in regards to capability, economic output. And yes, people going from point A to point B in conditions that are a bit cheaper than what they would be otherwise. The price of high-speed rail will most likely not cost as much as a plane ticket. If it's anything like Europe, where you had all of these people or all of these things competing, you had regular rail, you had high-speed rail, you had flights, you had short-term flights or like short-hop flights. And all of those things basically lowered the prices of that level of transportation. Transportation in the United States is expensive. If I wanted to get on a flight to go to somewhere like New York, there might be $300. Rail would drop the price of the flights just by having additional options to go into. And for those flights to compete with the rail, especially with high-speed rail, because it can get from point A to point B in rapid speed, well, the price of the tickets will most likely have to come down just to compete. Yes, it is a benefit. to have high-speed rail. If you're going to say anything, what you should have said was, well, why are we spending billions on high-speed rail when we can be spending that money into a Hyperloop? I mean, I don't want to get to the place fast. I want to get to there super fast. I mean, we've been spending that much money on it. Well, let's up the ante. Let's actually do something that can push this country forward. Why is it that it's always so regressive? I mean, what is with this notion of being hopeful? You're talking about being governor of a particular state. That state has various issues associated with it in regards to poverty and so forth. And you're telling me about your airplanes, and you seem to not get some of those things in the way that they affect the people within the society. This is just one case, but this is somewhat of a big case. I mean, you're talking about people going from point A to point B, and some people not having the capability of doing that because they don't have the financial or fiscal latitude to do such. And look, from the standpoint of Hannity, I guess, making you look good or anything else, I'm sorry, this interview was sad. I mean, there wasn't necessarily anything significant. And if you would have said the Hyperloop thing, that would have at least gotten people attention or drawn some eyes and be like, whoa, wow, that's pretty amazing. That's a big deal. But you didn't want the Hyperloop. You didn't even want a train. You just wanted people to get in airplanes. Great. Sad, predictable, Decathlon of tone deafness. There's another comment that you made that pissed people off about transgender. I'm not going to go into that one. The one or the two that I'm more interested in is what are your policies to deal with shantytowns? What are your policies to deal with the people who want, California to do healthcare or Medicare for all or some kind of public option in the way that they go about their affairs? And the fact of the matter is, California is not a sovereign currency. California, some of the problems that are attributed to California have to do with California needing to balance its budget just like every other state. But California is not a sovereign currency, meaning they have to get dollars like other states have to get dollars, but they don't make dollars. And so you have this situation where, regardless of how big California's economy is, it doesn't function as if it was a singular nation unto itself. And some of the rule sets that they have for the state screw with the budget royally. And so is Caitlyn Jenner the person who's going to fix that and solve that? And I get that they're having all sorts of attacks on Gavin Newsom and everything else, but would she have done better if she was there? Do you believe that Caitlyn Jenner would have had a lower death toll than Gavin Newsom? It's not so much that Gavin Newsom did phenomenal. It's more so that I have no expectation of Caitlyn Jenner, at least, listen to this interview, doing any better. It just seems like she's a name looking for an office just for the sake of getting an office, with the only thing going for her is basically her name and her capability to run very far. But those, again, are not necessarily attributes that are necessary or that are needed or that are even required or wanted for a governorship. Competence is the point. And this interview is not the hallmark of competence, either politically or, for that matter, from the standpoint of the public. That's not good sense. By the way, if you wanted to create desalination centers, well, yeah, that's probably going to be very much research in order to see whether or not it's worth it in order to invest that much electricity or that much energy and to make that work, or for that matter, even whether or not pumping it from point A to point B is the ideal way to do it. You may make better time buying it as opposed to pumping it and shipping it on the high-speed rail that you invest in. So who knows? That's more of a scientific inquiry more than anything else, as opposed to a political inquiry. But if it works out scientifically, then fair enough. There's nothing stopping you from doing both. If the need arises where your state needs X and it needs Y, then at that point it becomes an issue of priorities on whether or not you're going to provide both of those things to the state in the way that it needs it. If you're going to make the case that desalinization is needed, fair enough. Do that. If you're going to make the case that high-speed rail is not, I'm going to think you're insane. If anything, they're both needed. Raise taxes on people like yourself and people like your big jet owners, and you guys can do both. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Look, Gavin Newsom is getting a recall. Andrew Cuomo, still in office. Still in office. I don't know California's recall rules. I guess there's supposed to be a certain number of signatures. And with the COVID thing, of course, it creates this kind of weird destabilization where all of that stuff goes up for grabs. And he just got caught up in this. I don't believe for a moment that he wants to run against Caitlyn Jenner. Because basically, it's a wild card. It's hard to know how this shuffles out in the grand scheme of things. How people believe that you did X or you did Y. All of the free-for-all that's going to take place where all of this flack is just being thrown against the wall. This happened once before with the Democrat in California. And if I'm not mistaken, that's when Arnold Schwarzenegger ended up getting into office. So Newsom, beware. Just because she looks like a goofball and the stuff that she's saying doesn't necessarily mean that they won't put that goofball in office. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks a lot.